Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dari. Gopi Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dari. Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parvarajikacharya Sata Shri Shrimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prim Sekaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopagopnath Shamkund Radhakund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavanam Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Gangamai Ki Jai. Munamai ki jai, Tulsi Devi ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrendi ki jai, Gaura Premananda, Hari Hari Bolo. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories, Shri Shri Guru Enkaranga and His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're in the 10th canto on chapter 41, which is Krishna and Balaram enter Mathura, and we're on text 26. So, Ashnantya Ekas Tad Apasya Sotsava Abhya Jamana Akritopama Janaha Swapantya Utaya Nishamya Niswanam Prapaya Yantyo Abhyam Apohya Mataraha Asnacha Ekastarapashya Sotsava Abhyajamana Akritopamajana Swapancha Uttaya Nishama Niswanam Prapaya Yanchorbam Apoya Matara Ashnantya Ekastarapasya Sotsava Abhyaj Jamana Akritopamajana Swapancha Uttaya Nishamya Niswanam Prapaya Yantyorbam Apoya Mataraha Asnyanta Ekastarapasya Sotsava Abhyajamana Akritopamajana Swapancha Uttaya Nishamya Niswanam Prapaya Yantroba Bam Apoya Matara Asnyanta Ekastarapasya Sotsava Abhyajamana Akritopamajana Swapancha Uttaya Simshama Niswayam Swanam Prapaya Yantrobyam Apoya Mataraha. Anybody else? It's a little bit of a tongue twister. Okay. Ashnantyaha, taking meals. Ekaha, some. Tat, that. Apasya, abandoning. Saut savaha, joyfully. Avyaja manaha, being massaged. Akrita, not finishing. Upamajanaha, they're bathing. Swapantyaha, sleeping. Utaya, getting up. Nishamya, having heard. Nishwanam, the loud sounds. Prapayayantyaha, giving milk. Arpham, to an infant. Apoya, put aside. Mataraha, mothers. So translation, those who were taking their meals abandoned them. Others went out without finishing their baths or massages. Women who were sleeping at once rose when they heard the commotion, and mothers breastfeeding their infants simply put them aside. So we can repeat. Those who were taking their meals abandoned them. Others went out without finishing their baths or massages. Women who were sleeping at once rose when they heard the commotion, and mothers breastfeeding their infants simply put them aside. So, Omigyan Nanda Shagananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So there's no purport, and there's a very brief commentary by Jiva Goswami on this particular verse. And no, that's okay. Is the battery low, or so we just need to order a new mouse? I'll just order a new mouse and then we'll be done. So I was thinking about this verse, and I was thinking about the concentration and the focus and the separation, the intensity of emotions that the gopis are having in hearing Krishna's flute and dropping everything that they're doing, including even their children. The interesting thing is that Jiva Goswami comments in this particular regard is that they gave up everything. They gave up the eating and the massages and, the taking the bath, whatever else that it may, in weddings, celebrations, whatever they were doing, dropped everything and went. But interestingly enough, he said that others gave up feeding their newborn infants. This means that they fed them later. They didn't just totally neglect them. And since the mothers were greatly affectionate to their infants, it would be harder for them to leave. However, even leaving their children to see, however, even so, they left to see Krishna, but they are mentioned last. So, again, it's not that they didn't take responsibility for their children and abandon them, but they did put down basically all their duties and went to see Krishna. And so what this sparked from me, and especially from listening to my spiritual master's class yesterday and thinking about, because I'm always trying to figure out how this actually applies to me, because I'm obviously not on that level. I'm not even close to being on that level of having a personal relationship with Krishna, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and what to speak of having that level of intimacy with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But what stood out to me is this hearing, right? This hearing is so important for advancing in Krishna consciousness, so important. The gopis are giving the example that they just simply heard the flute and they dropped everything. And the one thing he also talks about, is it this one? Yes. Or sotsava can mean that they were overflowing with joy in their hearts and thus gave up eating and all these celebrations and all these other responsibilities. So what that says to us is that in order for us to give up this, material enjoyment, we have to develop our relationship with Krishna through hearing and develop that joy in our hearts, that spiritual joy, that ananda, that bliss, that spiritual bliss in our hearts, so that we can become detached from this material world and all the things that we think are creating joy for us, right? And family and friends and all these different things, nation, all these things that Prabhupada talks about. And he very specifically has said, and I remember many of the devotees in his memories talking about, him very specifically saying that there is no love in this world. There is no love in this material world because it's all self-motivated. The only love that's real love is the love of Krishna and the love of all the things in this material world, the love of his devotees, the love of all the living entities in this material world is only real when we see it through the perspective or the vision of our relationship with Krishna and everything being attached to him. That's proper love, right? Because then it's not selfish. Because if we learn to love Krishna, who's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that's the ultimate level of love. And so then if we start seeing everything that's connected to him, then we love those things, and then we're not loving with selfish intent, right? And that's the difference between material and spiritual love, is selfless versus selfish love. And so we really start to see in relationships in their proper perspective when we see them, as related to Krishna, because then we're trying to figure out, how do I interact with every single living entity in a way that's going to encourage their Krishna consciousness and not just them, patting my back and I pat their back, like some business exchange, right? Because if you do something for me, then, I'll do something for you, and everything's based on that kind of exchange when it comes to material love, right? And if you don't do those things, then boss, you're gone, right? You don't mean anything, it's just, this whole material machination, or just like, just misconception of what it means to have a relationship. But when we start hearing about Krishna consciousness and we start clearing out our heart of all the unwanted things, then we start really seeing things as they are, and then our motives can be changed, right? Because that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is we're trying to realign our motives from selfish motives to selfless motives. And the only way we can do that, because you need to be filled, right? You need to receive. You need to receive reciprocation. You need to receive affection and love and all these different things. But the only way to really do that in the proper way is to slowly detach yourself materially and slowly attach yourself to Krishna, because that purifies the heart. It cleanses the dust of the material contamination, so that the heart becomes pure, and then its motive becomes pure, and then everything related to your actions, your reactions, how you're speaking, how you're thinking, everything that you do is coming through that motive. And that's what we're going for, ultimately is going for. And so at the root of this, I was thinking about this, is hearing. Right, because we can see the highest level of hearing, of the gopis hearing Krishna and dropping everything and going to him regardless of social, quote unquote moral, that nothing they do is immoral or, incorrect. But if we imitate, then it certainly is. But they're giving that example of total absorption in Krishna. And so I was thinking that this hearing is so important, and that actually how we hear, and hearing itself, is the beginning of obtaining the end result. So our hearing through this process of Krishna consciousness about Krishna Katha is what will help us, reach this end result of having this personal relationship with Krishna and having this joy in our hearts so much joy in our hearts that nothing external can disturb us. Nothing can throw us off. Nothing can take us away from our Krishna consciousness. Nothing can take us away from that joy. And it's not that we don't end up feeling some, discomfort or some pain, that we're impersonal robots that are just going around in la-la land, just not, having some level of, sadness or, emotion related to being human, and not being empathic and just say, oh, well, that's just their karma, la la la, it's just like, it's not like that, it's a very, but that joy and that connection to Krishna deep in the heart is what carries us through all those things, and we can still be joyful because we know ultimately that Krishna's behind all of that. And even if we see somebody else struggling, even if we're struggling, we know in our deepest place that we're still happy because we know it's Krishna working out and working off all those layers of material conditioning, right? And so that we can get to that place. And it's not that we don't see, when other people might be suffering or going through some different challenge, that we don't have some compassion. And again, that we become emotionless. It's actually quite the opposite. The deeper you dive into Krishna consciousness, the more compassion you feel. The more pain you feel at other people's suffering. So then you're motivated to try to mitigate that suffering for somebody else, right? That's really the point of going through all the things that we've been through. And I can speak and had that realization myself because I've been through some really hellish things in my life. But ultimately, I understand that I have to take responsibility because whatever's happened to me is because I've done that to someone else in another life. And so I'm experiencing those things because I've actually done them. But what it should do is not, motivate anger and vengeance and resentment and all those other things. What it should do is motivate a deeper level of compassion to understand that somebody who's doing this or who's going through this is, is so suffering. So we keep that compassion. But, in order to keep that healthy at the same time, you also don't stick your head in the lion's mouth. You can be compassionate, to another living entity, be it a lion or a person, in some challenging situation. It may be best for your spiritual life to keep some distance, to protect yourself, because that person hasn't learned about their connection to Krishna, and so they're acting in a way that's disconnected to Krishna. And so, you have that right to protect yourself. At the same time, you can still remain compassionate and loving in your heart. It can be extremely challenging, but the deeper we go into the hearing and the deeper we go into connecting to Krishna, then the easier that will be to see and to resolve in our hearts. And I was thinking, too, because there's something else that I was thinking about is how we're very much like Krishna and have his different qualities in all, in all ways. We just have it to a much lesser degree. And so one of the things that I was thinking about is that, and my spiritual master said it yesterday, which kind of confirmed what I was thinking in his evening class, is that he was talking about rasa. And he said rasa, is not, which is taste, is not just this, it's not just a taste in the mouth of some food going through the mouth. It's not actually physical, right? We can taste the rasa of the chanting of the holy names, and we can taste the rasa of our relationship with Krishna, and it's not physical. So we can actually taste, with hearing, right? We can taste through this process of hearing, which Krishna, if you know, if you may have heard that Krishna, can taste with his hands or any part of his body because it's spiritual. And so that's what we're doing. We're in this evolutionary process of spiritualizing our body and becoming detached from it. It's not that we don't eat and we don't we don't eat or we don't taste things and we don't hear things through our ears, but just again, the significance of this hearing and the fact that we can actually taste our relationship with Krishna through this process of hearing. And so I want to go into the Bhagavad Gita because I went in, wanting to go deeper and thinking about this hearing process and how important it is, and wanting to hear what Prabhupada said, because it's this hearing process that will carry us to this relationship with Krishna. And so if we go to chapter 7 in text 1, it says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "Now hear, O son of Pritha, how by practicing yoga in full conscious of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt." So again, it's this hearing process that is, and this practicing of Krishna consciousness that's going to give us full consciousness of Krishna and who he is, and then our minds will become attached, our hearts, our bodies, our souls, everything will be able to know who he is, have that relationship, and then we'll be free from all the doubts and any misconceptions, about how to act or speak, or how to love Krishna for that matter. So Prabhupada shares in his purport that at the end of the 6th chapter, it has been clearly stated that the steady concentration of the mind upon Krishna, or in other words, Krishna consciousness, is the highest form of all yoga. By concentrating one's mind upon Krishna, one is able to know the absolute truth completely, but not otherwise. One should therefore begin yoga practice as directed in the last verse of the 6th chapter. Concentration of the mind upon Krishna, the Supreme, is made possible by prescribed devotional service in 9 different forms, of which Shravanam is the first and most important, which is hearing. Shravanam is hearing. So this is the first process of devotional service. It's the most important, is this hearing, because that's what goes directly to the heart. Krishna consciousness, and obviously the choice between mundane hearing and spiritual hearing and material hearing. If you hear material things, it will simply put more and more mud on the heart. It'll get caked, it'll get dried, it'll keep getting baked in your heart and never be able to express itself fully. But with spiritual hearing and Krishna conscious hearing, then we're able, again, to take off all those layers of caked mud that's dried on and actually be able to hear properly and have that relationship with Krishna. So in 1856, there's this verse also talks about this, and I'll go ahead and read. "One can understand me as I am, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, only by devotional service." Again, hearing being the first and foremost, but 9 others. "And when one is in full consciousness of me, by such devotion, he can enter into the kingdom of God." So in the purport, Prabhupada talks about this again after attainment of the Brahma Bhuta stage of freedom from material conceptions. So again, this hearing process is what gives us this freedom from material conceptions. Devotional service begins by one's hearing about the Lord. When one hears about the Supreme Lord, automatically the Brahma Bhuta stage develops, and material contamination, greediness, and lust for sense enjoyment disappears. As lust and desires disappear from the heart of the devotee, he becomes more attached to the service of the Lord, and by such attachment, he becomes free from material contamination. In that state of life, he can understand the Supreme Lord. This is the statement of Srimad Bhagavatam also. So it goes on to talk more, but again, understanding that this hearing process is so important for removing this lust and all these different desires in the heart, and just simply by hearing and focusing and putting it as your first priority is the chanting of the Maha Mantra, that it will cleanse your heart and it will give you the opportunity of having this beautiful relationship that we're hearing about with the gopis, right? So another verse in chapter 9, 9. chapter 9 is the most confidential knowledge. And the first thing he talks about is this hearing again. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, I shall impart, you will hear what I shall impart, to you this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence." So it's not that Krishna is just talking to Arjuna, he's talking to us. He's having this conversation because, Arjuna's a Nityasiddha devotee. He's a pure devotee of the Lord, but he's taking this position so that we can hear this conversation and make this internal adjustment in our heart, right? And so hearing this, we get the benefit. And Prabhupada shares, as a devotee hears more and more about the Supreme Lord, he becomes enlightened. This hearing process is recommended in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The messages of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are full of potencies, and these potencies can be realized if topics regarding the Supreme Personality of Godhead are discussed amongst the devotees. This cannot be achieved by the association of mental speculators or academic scholars, for it is realized knowledge. So again, this knowledge, as we hear this rasayana, as we hear this nectar, and it goes through the ear and it enters the heart, it's dynamic. It's not just mundane words, mundane letters put together. It's actually spiritualized and spiritually potent and can give us spiritual realization. So this hearing is so important. But hearing, again, can be done with the eyes. Hearing can be done by reading the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam. It can be done by the eyes and hearing through Srila Prabhupada's purports. We can hear it through, obviously, sharing, but we can develop this taste. Same thing with the Maha Mantra. We can develop this internal taste through this, chanting of and giving the tongue its real purpose of Krishna Katha, speaking about Krishna, and chanting of the Maha Mantra. So, he also shares that the devotees are constantly engaged in the Supreme Lord's service. The Lord understands the mentality and sincerity of a particular living entity who is engaged in Krishna consciousness. He knows what's in your heart and gives him the intelligence to understand the science of Krishna in association of the devotees. So as we're hearing, Krishna's in the heart, and he can actually knows what's going on, and he can give you the intelligence. So from this hearing process and chanting process and Krishna being in the heart, we can actually gain this intelligence to understand him. Discussion of Krishna is very potent, and if a fortunate person has such association and tries to assimilate the knowledge, tries to understand, then he will surely make advancement towards spiritual realization. So later in the purport, he says, now this first verse, has specific, this is the first verse of 9th chapter, has specific significance. The words idam jnanam, this knowledge, refer to pure devotional service, which consists of 9 different activities: hearing, chanting, remembering, serving, worshiping, praying, obeying, obeisances, obeying, maintaining friendship, and surrendering everything. So by the practice of these 9 elements of devotional service, one is elevated to spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness. When one's heart is thus cleared of material contamination, one can understand this science. So again, over and over and over, and I actually went back, I wanted to yesterday, but I didn't actually have the time. I went to, there's a larger, version of the Bhagavad Gita, and so I went back to this hearing, and there's just, there's like many references in the index to the importance of hearing and the association through the devotees, the advantages of all these different things, are packed into this. And so if you get the chance, if you can pick up a Bhagavad Gita and maybe one of the bigger ones, go through that and try to find these things and really remember. And of course, what the thing I kind of wanted to end on is in chapter 10 and 13 is this hearing of the chanting, the hearing of the Maha Mantra. So in 10:9, The thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. Their lives are fully devoted to my service, and they derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me, so hearing about me. Their hearts and souls are constantly submerged in Krishna, and they take pleasure in discussing him with other devotees. And then their talks are solely on the transcendental subjects. So go on further. This devotional service is just like a seed. And again, that's like I was saying, these words are dynamic and they're spiritually potent. So when we hear them, they're just like a seed that are sown in the heart of a living entity. And if he goes on hearing and chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, that seed fructifies, just as the seed of a tree fructifies with regular watering. The spiritual plant of devotional service gradually grows until it penetrates the covering of the material universe and enters into the Brahmajyoti effulgence in the spiritual sky. In the spiritual sky, also that plant grows more and more until it reaches the highest planet, which is called Goloka Vrindavan, the supreme planet of Krishna. Ultimately, the plant takes shelter under the lotus feet of Krishna and rests there. So this is what hearing and chanting the Maha Mantra does, is that it takes this little seed that we have in our heart that's always there in the soul, and it waters it over and over and over again, allows it to grow, pierce through the material covering, and finally reside at the lotus feet of the Supreme Couple, right? I mean, just imagine, you're connected to Krishna. Your soul is connected through this chanting and through this hearing. It's so important, how you hear, because sometimes we hear but we're not actually listening, right? It's so often we can find ourselves chanting and we realize that we're actually not listening to the Maha Mantra. It's so important. So it says, the Srimad Bhagavatam is also full of narrations about the relationship between the Supreme Lord and his devotee. Therefore, Srimad Bhagavatam is very dear to the devotees. In this verse, or in this narration, there is nothing about material activities, economic development, sense gratification, or liberation. The Srimad Bhagavatam is the only narration in which the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord and his devotees is fully described. Thus, the realized souls in Krishna consciousness take continual pleasure in hearing transcendental literatures, just as a young boy and girl take pleasure in association. So again, this hearing and how important it is. There's also, does it mention the verses? Anyway, maybe, do I have it still? Can't remember. Anyway, really important, this hearing process, and the Srimad Bhagavatam and all these things. There's a wonderful group of 17 through 21, I think, verses that are talking about this same thing of Shravanam Kirtanam, this hearing. And so I guess just thinking about, how we can attentively listen to and be present when we're chanting this Maha Mantra. And, understanding that it's non-different than Krishna, understanding that your relationship with him and hearing this Krishna Katha in the association of the devotees is what enlivens the soul and the spiritual spark to stay enlivened and lit, in spiritual intelligence, and for it to finally reach that relationship. So I guess that's what I'm trying to do, at least for myself, is encouraging myself to hear as much as possible and hear attentively, so that I can finally get to that place that the gopis are, of being able to just drop any material motive, drop anything, and understand that my priority is serving Krishna. My priority is my relationship with Krishna and his devotees, and how I can do that, and how the chanting of the Maha Mantra is what is going to purify my heart so that I can have that pure spiritual vision of each and every living entity, including my own self, and being able to get to that place where I'm selflessly serving, Krishna, selflessly serving Srila Prabhupada, selflessly serving my spiritual master, selflessly serving the devotees in the association of the devotees. So I think that's probably about, I think we've got a few minutes if anybody has any thoughts or questions. Extra thoughts. I don't know if I marked it, so I'll try to see if I can find it, because there was another verse that was really amazing. And it was really may not be able to find it, because there was just so much content within the Bhagavad Gita about this process of hearing and understanding. There's another verse here. It talks about Lord Chaitanya. It's 26 of Bhagavad Gita, 13:26. Again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. So again, getting out of the cycle of birth and death from hearing from authorities, about hearing from Krishna. This verse is particularly applicable in modern society, because in modern society there is practically no education in spiritual matters. And again, that's too something else that happens when we're hearing and we become purified. And I was talking about earlier, having that compassion, is that you start to see that. You start to see that the society you're living in, that there is no spiritual education. And so you're motivated by other people's suffering and lack of understanding and ignorance of sharing this process in whatever little way that you can. Like, I had the opportunity to go visit my mother-in-law. Is that what she is? Stepmother. Not mother-in-law. I'm not married. I was at one point, but I'm not anymore. My stepmother and my father. And one of the questions they asked me, and it was really interesting, was, are you allowed to have any other pictures other than Krishna? Like, if I gave you a picture of me and my wife, would you be able to put it up? Right? And it's kind of like a passive-aggressive question, because they're kind of testing you on how you're going to answer all of this. And, because what they brought up was the fact that a long time ago you gave us back all these personal pictures and said, it was against, basically your religion to put them up. And I was like, I don't remember saying that. But, but after conversation, I basically let them know, well, the reason I put all these pictures of Krishna up is because I want to remember him at the time of death, and I'm really focused on trying to make that a holistic part of my life. And yes, I can put a picture up of you, but the reality is I could put endless pictures of you, and through all this different attachment to family, I could be focused on that. Where I would rather keep you is in my heart, because that's where all my memories are. And I started talking about all the memories that we had. And I said, so I don't really need pictures, and a bunch of different material things to have a relationship with you present with me, right? And, and I talked about, because we've had some issues with relationship around the stepmother and all these different things, I also tried to express what this attachment is like I told them, like Prabhupada shared, and we've heard, I've had so many mothers. I've had so many fathers. I've been in so many relationships over so many lifetimes, right? And so I don't need to keep those things and that attachment. Better that we become attached to Krishna and see everybody through him and see your relationship through him. And then there's not this designation that's keeping us separated, either through religion, through the body, through all these different things. And so, these little bits of sharing actually count. And the proof of that is that my stepmother texted my sister and said, had a really wonderful visit from Jenna, which is my given name, and I wish, we saw her more. And so what I could understand from that is that it was beneficial. Whatever we have to give, I mean, and that's small. I'm not going out on the front lines distributing thousands of books, but if I can help somebody who's close to me in some small way, then so be it, right? And we all have that potency and potential because we're connected to our spiritual master in Krishna through the process of chanting this Maha Mantra. So all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Srimad Bhagavatam, all glories to the Association of the Devotees, all glories to Radha Golokananda Ki Jai.
Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Enam Kanvandam Maravindadalaya Taksham Varhavatam Samasitam Buddhasundaranam Kandar Bhagom Vidamaniya Vishesha Shobham Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Angani Yasa Sakalen Priya Priti Manti Lasyan Dipan Dikayanti Jiram Naganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadhu Jala Vigrahasya Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami 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 Govindam Adipurusham
Jahure mana hinan Vajahure mana Shinanda Nandana Vavaya Charanara Vindare Vajahure mana Shinanda Nandana Vavaya Charanara Vindare Durlava Manava Janama Satsange Amanava Durlava Manava Janama Satsange Amanava Janama Satsange Taroho Evava Sindure Taroho Evava Sindure Taroho Evava Sindure Taro Evava Sindure Sita Hata Pavatavarishana Vedina Jamini Jagire Sita Hata Pavatavarishana Vedina Jamini Sita Hata Pavaratarishana Edina Jamini Jagire Sita Hata Pavaratarishana Edina Jamini Jagire Vipale Sevinu Kripana Durajana Vipale Sevinu Vipale Sevinu Kripana Durajana Vale Sevinu Kripana Durajana Chapala Sukalava Lagire Chapala Sukalava Lagire Chapala Sukalava Lagire Chapala Sukalava Vedana Yovana Putra Parijana Itekiya Cheparati Tire Vedana Yovana Putra Parijana Itekiya Cheparati Tire Vedana Yovana Putra Parijana Itekiya Cheparati Tire Vedana Yovana Itekiya Cheparati Tire Kamala Dala Jala Jivana Talamala Mala Dala Jala Jivana Talamala Kamala Dala Jala Jivana Talamala La Dala Jala Jivana Talamala Bajahu Haripada Nitire Bajahu Haripada Nitire Bajahu Haripada Nitire Bajahu Haripada Nitire Shavana Kirtana Smarana Vandana Pada Shivana Dashyare 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 Ujjana Saki Jana Admani Vedana 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 Govinda Dasa Vilasare dasa vilasa re. Govinda dasa vilasa re. Govinda dasa vilasa re. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Radha Goloka Nanda, Radha Goloka Nanda Radhe. 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 Jai Radhe, Jai Radhe, Jai Radhe, Jai Shri Radhe, Jai Radhe, Jai Radhe, Radhe, Jai Shri Radhe, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Shila Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Shila Prabhupada. Having things that wherever you can birth, cross over the ocean of worldly existence, associating with saintly persons. Day and night I remain sleepless, suffering heat and cold, wind and rain. What a bit of flickering happiness I have vainly served wicked and miserable men. What assurance of real happiness is there in one's wealth, youth, sons, and relatives? This life toils like a drop of water on a lotus petal. Therefore you should always worship the lotus feet of Lord Hari. Govinda Das longs to hear the glories of Lord Hari. Chant his glories, constantly remember him, ordering his prayers, serve his lotus feet, become his servant, worship him, offer him prayer, serve his lotus feet, become his servant, worship him, serve him as a friend, and completely offer him his very self.
Hare Krishna. So a quick announcement before we do the Shastika. Since it's going to rain on Saturday, there's going to be a Harinam on Friday. And it's going to be in Hillsborough from 12 to 1:30. And we invite everyone who's able to come to Weaver Street Market at 12 o'clock on Friday. It's going to be a nice day. Haribo. Chaito Darpana Marjanam Bhava Mahamada Shreya Gairavyanam Yagavitaranam Anandam Buddhivaram Pranamrita Swaranam Sarvatamasnapanam Param Vidayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Bauda Nija Sarva Shaktis Chatarapita Niyamita Smarane Nakala Etadrishita Vakripa Bhagavan Mamapi Durdaiva Midrishami Hajjanina Nuraga Trinada Pisuni Chena Tarora Pisuhishuna Amanina Manadena Kirtadiyadahari Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitam Va Jagadisha Kamaye Mama Janmani Janmani Vishware Haribo Hotaki Trai Ainanda Tanuja Kinkaram Patitamam Vishame Bhavam Buddha Kripayata Vapada Pankaja Stita Duli Sadrushim Vachintaya Nayanam Galata Shudaraya Varanam Gadgada Ridaya Gira Pulakarnishitam Vapukada Tavanama Grahane Bhavishyati Yugayatam Namishena Chakshusha Bravashayatam Shunayatam Jagat Sarvam Govindam Grahename Aslishyavapadamratam Panastumam Adarshanam Marmahata Karotuva Yatatava Vendatolam Mat Prananatastusa Eva Napara. Victory to the Sri Krishna Sankirtan, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes the fire of conditional life, of repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan movement is the prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. O my Lord, congregational chanting of your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus you have hundreds and millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names you have invested all your transcendental energies. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names, but I am so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw on the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service, birth after birth. O Son Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servant, that somehow or other I have fallen into the ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, when will my eyes be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? When will my voice choke up, and when will the hairs of my body stand on end at the recitation of your name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I am feeling all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and he shall remain so even if he handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord,